So you found it okay, obviously. It wasn't like it was too far to your way.
No, if I had started walking right from the get-go, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thanks for coming into my studio, Brad. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to chat with me about your art, and I think we're gonna have a really good chat. So hopefully you're ready and had some time to think about the questions, and
A little bit, yeah.
and I guess we'll just get into it, eh?
Yeah, sure.
Can you give me a brief statement about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm Brad Fehr.
Yeah.
I'm going into my last year of my BFA.
Okay.
For the most part, I do painting and video. Those
Yeah.
are my preferred mediums.
Yeah.
For the most part in painting, I like to use old anachronistic frameworks and deal with new concepts over top of them.
Okay.
Sort of saying new things with dead ideas. And for video, it's kind of a crapshoot. It's
Yeah.
whatever gets caught on camera, and then
Yeah.
the magic of editing and creativity.
Yeah, so you kind of stay, in each medium, you stay to one sort of set of ideas. You explore different things, but you kind of separate your ideas into different formats.
I think so. And maybe it's just the medium sort of speaks to me in one way and another medium speaks in another. But there's certainly a division, I think, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And how long have you been making art for?
All my life, I suppose.
Okay.
It's been doodling since, as early as possible.
Yeah.
I didn't start painting until, I think maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I made my first video last spring. So I'm fairly new to the mediums I've chosen anyway.
Yeah, but you've always been interested in art, and you've always had a passion for creativity, I guess.
Oh yeah. Sculpty back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, drawing all throughout, for sure.
How often do you spend your time in rational thought versus feeling things?
I started out, I feel, very over-directed.
Yeah.
Like really trying to slap in, okay, I want to say this and this and think this and this. It's sort of something I've broken out of in the last couple of years.
Right. You mentioned in our preliminary discussion that you were interested in design, right? So, let's talk about that for a second. How did that come into your consideration to move to fine art?
In a practical sense, I was thinking, okay, if I come out with a design degree, I can make money and then do art on the side or some fantasy like that.
Yeah.
But kind of going off what we were just saying, I think maybe I came into university, which is where everything, takes off. You're told to do basically everything different than how you were doing it as a kid.
Yeah.
I think I was sort of interested in design because it's that very directed sort of your idea, and then you shape it deliberately to do something particular.
Right.
And as I sort of abandoned that from lack of skill or passion, it's become a lot more freewheeling.
Right. What is intuition, and what would you describe intuition as in terms of language? And on top of that, would you say it's your first language?
I think most people consider intuition synonymous with instinct, and I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
I think intuition is kind of a suite of instruments. It's more of a mechanism.
Yeah.
You apply it to whatever you're doing, or it applies itself, I suppose.
Yeah.
Kind of inevitably, and you get, I think, a better final product just by applying it. So in terms of language, I don't know. I would have to think it's the most natural language, isn't it?
Mathematics is a function of like time and space, right? Like it exists within I guess
framework,
definitions of like a value, right? Whereas intuition isn't necessarily tied to that, and it's like, I don't know, like I keep thinking of like time travel and like and like fantastic things, but like that's what I think when I think of that. Like I think I may have mentioned this to you, but I'm really into movies, and so everything always comes back to movies with me. And I think of like movies like Looper or Back to the Future and things like that, and like those feelings that we experience always kind of come back to patterns and deja vu and things like that.
Did you ever see the movie Primer?
I haven't seen it yet. Actually, my friend who I co-host my Crosstalk series with, he has talked about that tons, and he says it's the most fantastic time travel movie ever, and it's actually really good for people who are into physics and the sciences, like the people who would find reasons to kibosh, like the Star Trek thing. Where,
can't loop around the sun and go back.
or Superman or whatever, right? Yeah, I haven't seen Primer, but I want to.
Well, I won't ruin it for you, but I will say, just pertaining to this, that's a movie for me, like, I've seen on, like, the Wikipedia page, it has flow charts and diagrams of how the plot runs and how the physics behind it work. I understand none of that. I'm terrible with math and logistics. I'm bad at it.
Yeah.
But I still think it's a really powerful movie because I think there is that sort of element of gut.
Yeah.
You feel, you get what it's doing, even if you can't understand it. I don't know.
Exactly. Can you describe some situations where everything has worked out exactly as you've expected?
I was working on a painting based on Sputnik's Sweetheart. It's a Murakami book. Okay. And we all had to pick a book to do a series of paintings on. Okay. But I was doing one painting, and it's sort of just a painting of what do you call it? A Ferris wheel cart. Okay. You know, it has a door. You sit in it. Okay. Anyway, everything was going according to plan. I was painting the structure. I was doing a couple of layered things. Mm-hmm. So my professor comes in about halfway through. Yeah. Everything's going according to plan, smooth sailing. It's only half done. Like, it's barely a skeleton. Okay. And I'm telling him, okay, and I just need to fill in this and finish this up and so on. He says, stop, don't touch the structure again. It's done. And I'm looking at it half done, like I still have such an agenda to keep going into. Yeah. And he described me, and I carry this forward because I really do believe it. It's a lot more interesting when you have to put work in as a viewer to see it. That it's not just handed to you as a finished, bow-wrapped product. Right. And I think, that applies mostly to painting and a lot of it to representational painting. Yeah. But in terms of things going as expected, one thing I've learned is stop halfway and look at it and really think if you want to execute the rest of the plan. Right. But that question that's being asked is, what would it look like if you finished it, right? Yeah. So you're allowing the viewer an opportunity to imagine a completed piece, and it kind of lends itself to like ghost stories or horror or anything where your imagination is used, and sometimes against you and sometimes for you, but the human imagination is very powerful, right? So as an artist, we have the ability to create something that people haven't seen before, but at the same time we also have the ability to get people to imagine things. Yeah. So to your professor's point, there's value in doing that. There's value in not finishing the work and, sometimes leaving the drawing there or whatever. I don't know what it ended up looking like in the end, but that's what I imagine in my mind. And I've seen lots of art that looks like that, right? Yeah. What obstacles have prevented you from trusting yourself? When you're really getting to the conceptual thought or just the rational, reasonable thought, I know I overthink things, and I know it can take me in a direction I don't want to go. Yeah. So that's where I have trouble trusting myself. Right. There's this quote that comes to mind, I can't remember who said it, but it's like, if you think about it, painting is probably one of the scariest things to do because you have this raw canvas and you're basically forced to imagine something from nothing. Like there's literally, not literally nothing, but in terms of what you conceive, there's nothing in front of you when you start. So you're creating out of a void, right? Yeah, it's very daunting. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, it's painting in particular is tough because you've got so much to consider and you have so many options.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. You can actually go the opposite direction where you become a little bit egotistical and you stop experiencing and you start dictating. Right? And I think that's why it is daunting, because there's that tenuous line that you have to walk between not knowing what you're going to make or knowing exactly what you're going to make and destroying any like possibility of like real art happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
sort of like a flip. I never really read the comic, but Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh, okay.
I remember the last comic they do is sort of breaking the sort of comic. It's a meta comic, but they're going out in the snow, and the snow's been untouched, and the last panel is sort of unbordered, and they're jumping out the door.
Yeah.
And it's this great moment of, child potential.
Yeah.
And as a child, that's really great, but as an adult, it's a lot more daunting.
Yeah, because you have to consider consequences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where the rational comes in, right? Is that you all of a sudden are burdened with all this consequence.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad, you don't know, but
you want to plan.
Okay. Do you ever get overly involved in other people's problems or challenges?
But I think the relation sits in restraint.
Okay.
Because I try to be as unrestrained as possible when I'm making work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really, really letting your intuition run wild within boundaries is the way to go. But like I say, when you're around other people, sometimes you have to only give your intuition so much leash and then pull back. So I think restraint is really where all of those start being applied differently to my work, to other people's work, to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good consideration, right? Because it's so important to you to be grounded in self, I guess, or to trust self.
Yeah.
That's just your natural inclination is to put that outward. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sure you could find a lot of thought on the subject, but kind of keying in on what you said there.
Yeah.
I think maybe when you have a lot of intuition or you're driven by it, it's definitely an issue of self, of identifying and understanding yourself. And the second you do that, like, I think inevitably you have to understand where yourself sits in nature, in a wider environment, what have you.
Right. Yeah. And that's a big question.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is it's a challenge to think about that, and I'm sure you've heard this idea before, but artists are lenses through which people can view the world better, right? Like, we have the capacity to do that. Have you ever experienced any happy accidents in your personal life and in your professional life?
Well, professional, I mean, in my work, absolutely. In fact, I may rely on them too much. There is something to be said for going too far into intuition and then trying to backtrack after and sort of explain it in the rear view. And happy accidents are great. I think they make great art. But maybe I do rely a little too much on that gray area where is it something, is it not?
Yeah.
So professionally, sure. I mean, honestly, even going into painting as hard as I have, you could call a happy accident. Actually, like I was saying to you earlier, and like we talked about, going into design and coming here for design, if not for like a fundamentals teacher who said, if you go into fine arts, you won't be wasting your time, was what she said. If she hadn't said that, I don't know that I would have gone into fine arts.
That's right.
So it's all a weird happenstance.
Looking at your art, I see that. I see that you're like, okay, I want to look at this model or this type of this particular era of art or this particular identity or issue, because you talked about some of the things that you're trying to achieve with your art and conceptually, but I see that the more that I think about it, the more I look at your art, the more I recognize that those things exist, but then there's something totally other that happens in it, right?
I mean, I don't know too much about the whole death of the author thing, but I think you could apply that sort of idea to writing. once you've produced something, it's kind of out of you, and once it's out of you, it's its own entity, however ephemeral, however whatever.
Where can you expect to see yourself in the next 5 years?
Well, like I say, I sort of have a veil covering that even for me.
Yeah.
I guess there's a lot of possibilities and there's a lot of feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, tentatively, I'm planning to go into my master's, probably in painting.
Yeah.
And then hopefully work as a happy painter / artist and not have to take side jobs, but that's an ideal, and those are rarely reached.
Yeah.
So there's possibilities, and I have a feeling of where I want to be in a gut way. Like I know how I want to live, or the feeling I want to have in 5 years. But I think setting an exact plan would be a mistake.
Right.
And I think setting an exact plan, just because, those ideals rarely come to fruition, can be very demotivating and really set you back. Yeah.
If you have a framework, or if you have a conception of what you're interested in, you can adapt, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then in the long run, you're probably better off for it.
I would hope so. We'll see.
Yeah. Would you move away from art at all, do you think? I know it's hard to say, but...
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can always... And I think to an extent, that's what a modern day professional artist does. You're always at the grind, you're trying to sell yourself, you're trying to, branch out and do all of this.
Yeah, you end up making a bunch of videos and writing instead of actually making art.
Exactly. That's perfect.
I mean, but to your point... While I do that, it's still creative, and it still has intent. It still has that intuition, that feel of putting art out into the world. Whether it's obviously art, who can say?
Yeah.
But that's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think this is a really good question to ask you as a student of philosophy and art, and as someone who's very intuitive. So, here we go.
Okay.
Do you believe in destiny, in free will, or karma? And how does all that relate to the art? And do you think there's purpose for art?
Going back to that point of looking at modern issues from my particular perspective, with my position in the current society.
Yeah.
You have to really think about this sort of thing. Like, why am I making the choice I am? Why do I see the options I see?
Yeah.
So free will, I don't know if I'm sold on anymore. I think we all have agency. I think there's extents to that agency. Destiny and karma, I don't believe in at all. I think both require a really big grand thing at the end to decide those. Not that I know very much about karma, but from what I know, it's something of not a point system. That's maybe a bit crude.
Yeah, and I chose those two concepts because they seemed like they were different enough, but also similar enough to give you that differentiation from free will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
continue.
I think you can look back, and I guess to an extent I'm a certain brand of fatalist. I think you can look back and say, okay, well, that's how things shook out. That's how they were going to shake out.
Yeah.
But as to the last part, art, and what it does, I think I can give a very simple answer, maybe too broad.
Okay.
I think art's just communication. It's like anything else, it's a pool cue. You set up your shot, you pick your force, you know what you want to happen, but ultimately you're banging a pool cue against a ball and seeing where they all fall out.
Yeah, and there's skill, and then there's luck, and sometimes there's circumstance, like someone spilling a beer.
Sure.
Or, a beautiful woman or whatever, right?
Sure.
Like, there's all kinds of things that can cause it to shake out differently.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I asked you about that versus art is because how do you relate it back to art? Like, if you're an agent and you have this ability to act, but not necessarily independently of your environment or independently of your
experience up to that point.
Art is, and I've said this elsewhere on my blog and in other interviews, but art to me is, you can't have heart without art. Like, and when I say that, what I mean is you can't be a human being without creativity. Absolutely. Right?
Yeah. And to an extent, I don't know that free will or destiny or karma really matters. Does it matter if I'm choosing something for me, or if I'm choosing something because something within me has arranged my parts such that I want that?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter to me as much.
Yeah.
I mean, you can run it out as philosophy does.
Yeah.
And say, okay, well, what about this example? But I think in general, life is a lot smaller than people would figure. And maybe actually going counter to that, art is a gateway to something bigger. It is communication. It's you expressing yourself, others expressing themselves on that, putting themselves into that, you recycle it back.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting point.
Yeah.
I hope that you found value out of this, Brad.
Absolutely.
And I think that, going back to the thing about communication and discussion, as I continue to flesh out this community thing that I'm working on, like, I hope to add you in, slot you in, to use the card metaphor, as like, a jack or whatever, and then we can build out something a lot grander. But yeah, that's basically it. So I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we can do something again in the future. And
I hope so too.
But that's it. So
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.